This is Politically Incorrect, the largest German-language non-mainstream information weblog, www.pi-news.net, with around 200,000 users every day. PI News.net has established itself as the specialist against otherwise suppressed politically incorrect information and is prospering with that motto. I am speaking with Caroline Glick, the managing editor of the Jerusalem Post and famous writer for the JP, as it is here often abbreviated. Sadly, not everybody in Germany will know you so well as here in Israel. What was, in short words, your way to where you are now, Caroline?
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me and allowing me to speak to your wonderful audience in Germany. In my background, I've done a lot of things in my life. I started my career in the army, in the Israeli army. I was an officer for 6 years there, and I served as a captain and a core member of Israel's negotiating team with the PLO during the early years of the peace process with the Palestinians, and negotiated about 6 different agreements with them during my military service. I went on from there, served as a foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu the first time that he was Prime Minister in the 1990s. And I began writing for the newspaper as a columnist and specializing in strategic issues, military issues, and U.S.-Israel relations and Israeli relations with Europe and the Arab world around the year 2000. And so I've been working as a strategist. I've worked through the years also advising U.S. war colleges and the Israeli War College on issues of strategy and operational warfare. So that's basically my background outside of journalism, and aside from that, I've been the senior columnist of the Jerusalem Post since 2002.
Thank you very much for this short summary of your very impressive CV.
Thank you.
We are meeting you in the Gush Etzion area in what the mainstream media would call a settlement in an Arab neighborhood. How is it explicable that all the world requires Israel to give the Arabs full right, free movement in Israel, etc., but benignly accepts that the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinians, want their country Judenrein?
Yes, you say the world calls it a settlement, and me and my family, we call it home. And I think that really you've hit the heart of the issue here about what the sort of demand, this horrible anti-Semitic demand at the core of the so-called peace process with the Palestinians really is, which is that Palestinians get extraordinary rights and Jews are denied basic civil rights, including the right to property, the right to live without fear of being murdered, and they're free to incite the murder of Jews, of our families, of our children. And just a couple days ago we saw a baby, a 1.5 year old, run over by a jihadist who was incited to murder all Jews from the time that he was born. So, you know, what we're seeing here is a movement more than a policy, and the movement is to deny Jews civil rights in a way that we really haven't seen, and it's become mainstream. You know, now the scapegoat is the so-called settlers, but really the distinction it's a label to try to hide what is behind this, which is that this whole concept of peace or land for peace is really just not about peace, it's about denying Jews civil rights. And that's why it's, I think, failed, and that's why I think it will continue to fail, because it's not based on understanding that there are two sides to this issue and that we have to come to an agreement. Rather, it's based on a zero-sum game saying that the Palestinians get all of Israel's land and the Jews are denied basic civil rights and the right to life.
So why is it that the world accepts, obviously, that terror happens here against Jews by Arabs for whatever reasons? May they be religious, may they be political, but that even the Jews, the Israeli, are denied the right of self-defense? How do you explain it in the public opinion of Europe and of the Western world?
I think that there's an attempt to deny the sort of holistic nature of the jihadist mindset. That if you can parcel out the hatreds, if you can say this hatred is justified, this hatred is not justified, then you don't have to actually contend with the hatred itself. You don't have to deal with the core. So if you can say that violence against Jews is justified, but violence against Germans or French or Americans is not justified, then what you're saying is, well, we don't have to really deal with it until later. But we've seen what happened. You know, the Europeans have, in particular, bent over backwards to try to justify the murder of Jews by Palestinians, and then they got it in Paris so badly. And the same people, the same socialist government in France that's been attacking Israel right, left, and center on everything and funding organizations to undermine Israel's ability to enforce our laws in Jerusalem, in our capital city, then get it from the same people in their capital city. And so I think that the attempt to justify the murder of Jews is also an attempt to not prevent the murder of everybody else by the same forces, because it's the same forces that are killing us, that are killing Europeans, that are killing Americans, that are killing Indians, that are killing Pakistanis, and so on and so forth.
Yes, the big killing, and we have a problem, and the Europeans and the German-speaking audience of www.pi-news.net is very interested in your opinion. We have this huge wave of young men from Africa and particularly Arab countries streaming into Europe. In Germany, the Chancellor swore to a policy of open doors to the so-called refugees. Here you have the same in smaller numbers, for example in the neighborhood of Hatikva in Tel Aviv. But they are here in Israel not really welcome, but they are called intruders, and many wait in detention centers for the decision of asylum or not asylum. Who is right?
Well, I think, you know, the problem is that you have a moral inversion when you say that we want open borders, because basically the idea is that we want to have a mea culpa for the Holocaust. And so we, the Germans, the Germans, conducted a genocide of Jewry, mass expulsions of victims of Nazism outside of Germany to concentration and death camps in Poland and other places. So you say, well, we can exculpate our guilt by bringing in these Muslims. But the problem is that you can't say that everything is the same. You can't say that German and Polish Jews and Czech Jews and so on and so forth are the moral equivalents of Syrian Muslims who support ISIS, who have been living in Turkey for the past 4 years and are now flooding into Europe. They're not the same. And really, I think it speaks to the basic moral failure that we've seen so many times unfolding in Europe in recent years, which is that you want to blame the Holocaust on things like militarism, on adjectives as opposed to evil. And so if you want to eschew evil, then you have to embrace good, which means you have to support Israel, which means that you have to support freedom, and it means that you have to say no to people who oppose the basic values that enable a man to be free. So, you know, in Israel, we look at the Eritreans, or some here who say, oh, they're refugees, oh, they're whatever, Sudanese are refugees. And so what we say, the vast majority of Israelis say, no, they want to come here for work, they're coming here for economic reasons, and that means that they're not refugees, and they don't deserve asylum. They shouldn't be taking the job of unemployed Israelis, and they shouldn't be taking the job, frankly, of Palestinians, and we're not here to be an open job market for anybody who can climb through the fence. So that's why we've built a fence, and basically we've stopped the flow of illegal immigration into Israel from Egypt as a result of building a very long border fence that may not solve the terrorism problem because they don't have a problem going over fences, but it has to a large degree solved the problem of infiltration to Israel by African work migrants posing as refugees from war-torn areas.
You were mentioning the lack of support for Israel and its values, and ridiculously, there appears to be really very little support for Israel as the Western values lighthouse in much surrounding darkness, as we would say. Is Europe just over-moral to the Arabs, Palestinians, or what may be the reason for such little open support for Israel, but even hostility? Actions of countries like Sweden, Norway, the UK, or the EU SSR, as we sometimes start calling it, appear to be blind towards all the wrongs done by the so-called Palestinians. How can this be explained?
Well, I think that hatred of Jews plays a very large and major role in the hostility that Israel faces from the European Union and from specific European states like the ones that you mentioned, the Swedes, the Norwegians, and others. I don't think that we can hide our heads in the sand and say that this doesn't have anything to do with prejudice, because the fact of the matter is that Israel is condemned regardless of what we do. That is, that this isn't criticism that is raised against Israel because we do something that warrants criticism. We get criticized no matter what we do. We leave Gaza, we get criticized. We empower, we give money, we open up the border to importation of things that can be used to build missiles into Gaza, and we're attacked. We're attacked no matter what we do. We attack when we protect ourselves. We're attacked when we make ourselves vulnerable. So that shows that the criticisms of Israel are irrational. They have nothing to do with us. They have something to do with the people who are criticizing us, which is the very definition of discriminatory behavior. And we've seen this so many times over hundreds and hundreds of years from Europeans towards Jews. We're not stupid. We know how to recognize hatred when we see it. So I think that that plays a large role in it. And I also think that, you know, you have now an extremely anti-Semitic, genocidally anti-Semitic Muslim minority that's growing in the countries of Europe. And you have democratic forms of government there. And so you have pandering by politicians who believe that they can get Muslim votes. And again, polling suggests that the Muslims in Europe are overwhelmingly hateful towards Jews. And so this also gets votes. And so I think when you add the two reasons that I see for the hostility towards Israel together, you get a toxic mix that really renders Europe an uncredible actor on the stage with everything having to do with Israel.
You gave the word, because with all those grave problems in Europe, particularly the Muslim and also the African mass immigration without any control, the more frequent and more devastating terror, the conservative right-wing parties are on the rise, like in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders, the great friend of Israel, by the way, in Sweden, Denmark, Austria, and last not least in France. They are all called Nazis, and even your colleague wrote an op-ed titled "Sigh of Relief." Relief of what? Because the Front National was not elected in France.
Look, you know, I don't want to get too much into the domestic politics of specific European states, but what I can say is that we here in Israel do worry about the rise of the far right in Europe, because a lot of these parties do have past statements that have been made by their leaders, like, for instance, Marine Le Pen's father, that involved Holocaust denial, that involved openly anti-Semitic statements. So, you know, it isn't clear that the far right is simply about liberal democracy and maintaining European values for European people. There is a layer of their ideology that is not liberal, but rather is fascist, and that is a source of worry for Jews. And it doesn't mean that Israel can't have good relations with whatever governments come into Europe into power, so long as they are willing to take reasonable positions towards us that are based upon reality, as opposed to just sort of obsessive compulsive Jew hatred. So, you know, if it works out that the far right in Europe that's being empowered as a result of reasonable public anxiety over this flood of immigration from the Islamic world into Europe, then we welcome a close working relations with them, just as we would welcome similarly close relations with any government that comes into power in Europe. Right now, so, you know, the left has left us severely disappointed and also troubled. So would like to believe that there's an answer on the other side of the spectrum, and we hope that that's the case.
Yes, many of those parties rising in Europe do have a very friendly attitude towards Israel, like Schweden-Demokraten, like the Geert Wilders party, and even Marine Le Pen has excluded her father from her party because of his anti-Semitic expressions formerly. So maybe it's something to reconsider with the layer.
It's not a question of reconsideration. Look, if I agree, I actually met with one of the representatives of the Swedish Democratic Party last month at a conference in the United States, and I was very impressed by him. He was a very, very wonderful young man. And we just have to wait and see. You know, right now you have the entire parliament has joined a coalition together to oppose the Swedish Democrats. So, you know, there's a long road there's a long haul for these people to attain power. I wish them Godspeed, and I hope that they continue to maintain their support for Israel, because I think, again, the key to maintaining your faith with liberal democratic values and protecting them, protecting the rights of women and things like that today, really is about protecting Israel, is really about standing with Israel and recognizing the truth of the nature of jihad, of the nature of Jew hatred, of the nature of radical Islam, and being able to face it and put together policies that will protect your countries and your people from this kind of hateful ideology and the empowerment of its purveyors.
Different from the Lügenpresse, the media of lies as they are called in Europe very often nowadays, the weblog pinews.net has no hidden agenda. In our motto, everybody can see what to expect. Thus, most of our users are pro-Israel for various reasons, we presume. Is there any message to our around 200,000 daily users from your side?
Oh yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys very, very much for your support for Israel. We do appreciate it, and we know as well that there is a very significant group of Europeans throughout the continent, in Germany and really throughout Europe, that we can rely on to be a bulwark of support for the Jewish state. And we wish you Godspeed in your efforts. We wish you all the best, and God should just bless you and strengthen your cause for your own countries, and also for the continued friendship between the Jewish people and the people of Europe. Thank you.
Politically Incorrect, the largest German language non-mainstream information weblog, www.pi-news.net, expresses our gratitude for this interview and wishes you personally, Caroline Glick, for the Jerusalem Post and for Israel all the best.
Thank you.
Toda Rabbah.
Thank you.